So, Rector Magnificus, distinguished professors, dear brothers and sisters, I thank the organizers of this important conference, and in particular, Monsignor Kumetz, Rector of Pasmanik Peter Catholic University, Professor Daly, Rector of Ludovica University of Public Service, and Professor Laurent Uyhazi and Professor Laszlo Gayer for their gracious invitation and warm hospitality. And thank you all for coming to this important event. Peace be with you all. These are Christ's words with which our new Pope Leo presented himself to the Church and the world. He is, in fact, a son of St. Augustine, who taught in the City of God that peace is the ultimate, final good of all things, and there is no one who does not wish to have peace. There is a natural, universal desire for peace in all human beings. Even those who foster conflict and wage war, says Augustine, desire peace, but they want it in their own way. True peace is not built on domination or coercion, but on justice. Even more, peace depends upon a culture wherein individuals endure injustices out of what Leo XIII called a love for justice, based on the recognition of our common humanity and our love of neighbor. And as John the 23rd said in his encyclical on peace, peace is but an empty word if it does not rest upon that order that is founded on truth, built up on justice, nurtured and animated by charity, and brought into effect under the auspices of freedom. The Church continues to have much to contribute to the intellectual conversation on just peace, but I believe that her primary role is pastoral, to walk with everyone in their quest for peace, especially those who suffer and so cry out for justice, promoting that love which moves them to be peace builders. The Church wants to walk with all to foster a true sentiment of belonging to our common human family, a fraternity where the good of each is connected to the good of all. On this view of humanity, let's construct what Paul VI called a civilization of love, expanded by Pope Francis with his magisterium of Fratelli Tutti, siblings all. After briefly sketching a biblical view of the problem of conflicts over natural resources, I will introduce a martyr of our days and then reflect on the role of the Church in conflicts over natural resources. The Bible highlights the critical role of natural resources, particularly water, in ensuring peaceful coexistence among different peoples. For example, in Genesis, Abraham resolves a dispute over a well through a covenant with Abimelech, emphasizing the need for just institutional agreements to manage resource conflicts. However, Isaac's experience, a generation later, where similar disputes arise despite past agreements, his experience illustrates the fragility of such covenants when fear and power dynamics intervene. These narratives suggest that while justice and legal frameworks are essential for peace, they are also fragile. So the biblical accounts serve as a realistic lens through which to address modern conflicts over natural resources. The Bible's acknowledgement of complexity does not lend itself to constructing systems as much as it seeks to transform lives. Justice and peace are not merely theoretical ideals, but concrete realities that the gospel calls us to build together, nourished by God's gift of grace and his work of redemption in Christ. Justice is not established by impersonal laws and regulations alone, but by the lives of dedicated individuals, individual men and women with the courage to stand up against injustices and for the common good, and who are willing to endure hardship regardless of the consequences. A just society, then, grows from the life of just individuals. When societies and institutions are corrupted by widespread structural injustices, the quest for justice, which is necessary for peace, depends on the conscience and moral resolve of individuals who choose to overcome evil with good, even at great cost. For this reason, I would like to tell you now about a man, a modern-day martyr, who gave his life for the gospel and for the common good of poor people, at whose expense their lands were exploited for natural resources. In northeastern Honduras, in Tocoa, the largest town in the district of Colón, Juan Antonio Lopez was a family man and a delegate of the Word, a lay leader of small Christian communities which make up his parish of San Isidro Labrador. He presided regularly over the liturgy of the Word. Juan Antonio was very devoted to Saint Oscar Romero and followed his example. But Juan Antonio's faith was never confined within ecclesiastical walls. Rather, it animated his commitment to social justice and ecological responsibility. He was the social action coordinator of his diocese and an active member of the Mesoamerican Ecological Ecclesial Network, which unites churches of Mexico and Central America in their defense of creation. Juan Antonio understood that, as it says in Laudato Si, to hear both the cry of the earth and the cry of the poor, a true ecological approach always becomes a social approach. It must integrate questions of justice in debates on the environment. In 2019, as alderman or councillor of the municipality of Tocoa, he founded the Municipal Committee for the Defense of Common and Public Good. He was also a pivotal figure of the Pastoral Ministry for Integral Ecology across Honduras, serving with Bishop Henry Ruiz from the Diocese of Trujillo. Together, they organized workshops on ecological and social issues, raising awareness on the realities of exploitations that were intentionally kept hidden from public knowledge. They led protests and formed alliances among ecclesial and civic movements, which made their initiatives very effective. In particular, Juan Antonio Lopez became a leading voice in opposing the illegal and destructive operations of the Pinares Mining Company, formerly EMCO Mining Company, owned by one of Honduras' most powerful families, the Facuse. The company had a business interest in the land of the national park called Montaña Botaderosa Carlos Escaleras, a protected area that is essential to the lives of the local population. In 2013, the government reduced the core of the protected area of more than 24,000 hectares by allotting 217 hectares for programs of agrarian reform meant to support small farmers, alleviate rural poverty, and strengthen food security. But this intention was sabotaged. The lands were funneled into the land exploitation project of the Pinares Mining Company. Between 2017 and 2022, with the complicity of state officials, Pinares acquired 12 parcels of land that had been designated for agrarian reform. In one instance, a security guard received 5 parcels for agrarian reform, only to sell them to Pinares just 6 months later at a significant profit. These transactions, facilitated by individuals closely tied to the mining company, was part of a larger pattern of corruption, deceit, and manipulation of laws. Some landowners were pressured or deceived into selling their parcels, perhaps unaware of the full legal and ecological consequences. Through falsified municipal documents, manipulated environmental studies, and hidden land transfers, Pinares effectively transferred vast portions of public and ecologically vital land to their own private interests. The saliency of the problem is heightened by the fact that the national park is directly connected to the Guapinol and San Pedro rivers, vital sources of drinking water for the surrounding population. As early as 2018, when the mining company began to build an access road, the water became unusable for about 50,000 local residents. This was not a future environmental risk, but an immediate consequence. When local communities organized to defend their right to clean water, they were met with repression. Peaceful protesters were criminalized, environmental defenders were imprisoned, and fear spread through public defamation and death threats. The company claimed that the mining operations would generate jobs and wealth for the region, but it is inconceivable that the well-being of the population is a genuine concern when the very foundation of life, access to safe water, is sacrificed for profit. On Wednesday, the 11th of September last year, 3 days before his murder, Juan Antonio confided to a local priest that municipal officials had offered him about $310,000, 8 million local currency, lempiras, to abandon the movement. He refused to step back. 3 days later, on Saturday, the 14th of September, the feast of the Exaltation of the Holy Cross, Juan Antonio led the Liturgy of the Word at 7 p.m. in the small chapel of his neighborhood. After the liturgy, already in his car with his wife, 2 daughters, and 2 fellow pastoral workers, gunmen opened fire and murdered him. Such brutal violence is the price for protecting people and nature. The story of Juan Antonio's martyrdom reminds us that true, lasting peace cannot be built apart from justice, and justice cannot exist where natural resources are plundered for private gain at the expense of the common good. But it also confirms that the issue of natural resources cannot be resolved with a merely normative legal approach, especially because in conflicts over natural resources, there is often the corrupt complicity of government and political authorities. In fact, Juan Antonio was technically under a protection order issued in 2023 by the Inter-American Court of Human Rights. Yet these measures are clearly ineffective in Honduras. The story of Juan Antonio shows how faith in Jesus Christ shapes such a correct understanding of the common good and our relationship with nature. And now I invite you to take a few moments to meet Juan Antonio.
Han asesinado a Juan López, pero su lucha honrada y firme sigue viva y renovada en la fuerza de las comunidades eclesiales de base.
Cuando uno se mete en este país a defender los bienes comunes, los bienes naturales, los bienes públicos, lógicamente entra en choque con los grandes intereses y por tanto hay gran inseguridad. Si uno sale de su casa, uno siempre tiene en mente que no sabe qué le puede pasar y si puede volver a su casa y volver a ver la familia.
La muerte de Juan era ya una muerte anunciada.
Yo mismo en alguna ocasión recibí de parte de un funcionario del gobierno municipal la advertencia de que si no negociábamos con la empresa, nos pasaría lo que le pasó a Berta Cáceres.
No más muertes a los líderes que defienden la casa común. Basta ya.
Eso que llamamos justicia en este país tiene a veces nombre y apellido. Estamos hablando de una justicia a veces doblegada por el gran capital.
Sirvan estas palabras para agradecer a Dios por la vida y legado de Juan López.
Ho appreso con dolore che in Honduras è stato ucciso Juan Antonio López, delegato della parola di Dio, coordinatore della pastorale sociale della diocesi di Trujillo e membro fondatore della pastorale dell'ecologia integrale in Honduras. Mi unisco al lutto di quella Chiesa e alla condanna di ogni forma di violenza. Sono vicino a quanti vedono calpestati i propri diritti elementari e a quelli che si impegnano per il bene comune in risposta al grido dei poveri della terra.
What then is the Church's role in building peace amid conflicts over natural resources? Her crucial role is one of service, walking with men and women who, pursuing justice, work for peace. The martyrdom of Juan Antonio Lopez shows how closely and deeply involved the Church can be, acting in her members to conserve natural resources and respect the people whose dignity and livelihood depend on these resources. This is true conflict resolution and the construction of just peace. Moreover, the individual action of faithful Catholics is informed and guided by the magisterium of the Church, who educates her children to be ministers of the gospel, contributing to integral human development, a just society, a civilization of love. So, in the light of what we have seen and heard so far, let me now draw 7 points from the social magisterium of the Church. First, the magisterium instructs us about both the necessity and the limitation of relying on legislation and on political authorities in resolving social issues. In Leo XIII's Rerum Novarum, which inaugurated modern Catholic social teaching, we read that rulers should anxiously safeguard the community and all its members, because their power is legitimized by their duty to preserve the community's well-being. And this is a government's whole reason for existence. John the 23rd reaffirms that human societies cannot attain peace without the presence of those who, invested with legal authority, preserve its institutions and do all that is necessary to sponsor actively the interests of all, underlined all, its members. But as Leo XIII had already noted, a political, juridical response alone is insufficient, especially when political systems are corrupted. Second, the construction of a just peace depends on placing human persons and their dignity at the center. Paul VI laments a human society that is sorely ill, sick, very sick, and explained that the cause is not so much the depletion of natural resources, nor their monopolistic control by a privileged few, but it is rather the weakening of fraternal ties between individuals and nations. True peace is grounded in fraternity. Gaudium et Spes recognizes the universal call to human fraternity in light of God being the first principle and final end of all. Paul VI then emphasizes that Christians in particular are called to build a civilization of love. And again, this was continued and deepened by Pope Francis in Fratelli Tutti. Third, once the human person is at the center, our concept of development must follow. John Paul II teaches that development must not be understood solely in economic terms, but in a way that is fully human. Diverting natural resources toward extractive and military industries while neglecting the poor is not development. It is injustice on which no peace can be built. The advancement of the poor is not a burden, says John Paul II. It's not the advancement of the poor is not a burden, but a great opportunity for the moral, cultural, and even economic growth of all humanity. This is what we call countercultural. Fourth, the Church affirms the value of the market, but warns against making it the absolute. John Paul II denounces the idolatry of the market that treats all things, people, nature, even spiritual goods, as commodities. Beyond any system of exchange, something is due to the human person simply because he is a man, simply because he is a woman, by reason of his lofty dignity. The criticisms are directed not so much against an economic system as against an ethical and cultural system. The economy needs ethics in order to function correctly, but not any ethics whatsoever, but an ethics which is people-centered. An economy that needs ethics is also very countercultural. One is tempted to say that insofar as the so-called invisible hand of the market is choking people to death, it is an evil hand. Fifth, the ecological crisis is rooted in an anthropological and moral crisis. John Paul II links consumerism with environmental destruction of the natural environment. At the root of this senseless destruction lies an anthropological error that sees nature as raw material for manipulation rather than as a gift to be cared for. Benedict XVI adds that the book of nature is one and indivisible, on the side of the environment as on the side of life, sexuality, marriage, the family, social relations, in a word, integral human development. And he concludes that with regards to the challenges related to the natural environment, the decisive issue is the overall moral tenor of society. Human dignity and the natural world are inseparably related. Sixth, there is a need for a profound cultural and spiritual transformation. According to Leo XIII, conflicts start at the level of ideas. He condemned various ideologies that threatened the sanctity of human life and the dignity of every human being. Ideologies, chiefly materialism and secularism, reduce and distort reality, offering a fallacious grounding for justice and peace, and often depriving people of the spiritual resources that religions offer to recognize their common humanity. In Laudato Si', Pope Francis reminds us that everything is interconnected, and the care of creation is inseparable from justice, fraternity, and faithfulness to others. For the technocratic paradigm reduces the world to data and utility, severing it from the horizon of existential meaning and so the recognition of the dignity of every human being. Thus, the crisis is not only environmental, not only political, but it is spiritual and cultural. It demands a cultural revolution. Earlier, Leo XIII emphasized that besides mitigating conflicts, the Church is uniquely able to resist ideological reductions of reality that undermine a just peace based on the recognition of a common humanity where each exercises personal responsibility for their neighbor. Another countercultural idea. Recalling the Church's pacifying history, he concludes, having tamed the barbarian races by inspiring them with love of justice, the Church has led them from the ferocity of their warlike habits to the practice of the arts of peace and civilization. It sounds as if this dynamic has reversed itself. For this reason, Pope Francis calls for a distinctive way of looking at things, a way of thinking, policies, an educational program, a lifestyle, and a spirituality that can restore our sense of responsibility. Seventh, all these ideas converge in the Church's vision of integral human development. The 6 previous points form a coherent whole. The limitations of political authority, the centrality of human dignity, the priority of the poor in development, the moral limits of markets, the moral and anthropological roots of ecological crisis, and the spiritual cultural conversion needed to overcome it. These are not abstract principles. They are the foundations for a just and lasting peace. They call for development rooted in the solidarity and fraternity, truth and love for which Juan Antonio gave his life. For this reason, the Church has consistently spoken of the principle of solidarity. John Paul II recalls that Leo XIII called this principle friendship. Pius XI called it social charity. Paul VI called it a civilization of love. And most recently, Pope Francis called it fratelli tutti, siblings all, the active recognition of a single shared human vocation as sons and daughters of God. And I think of promoting integral human development in the words of John the 23rd, who hoped that people would recognize a cardinal duty arising from our common human nature, namely that love, not fear, and fear we saw in Abimelech's case, love, not fear, must dominate the relationships between individuals and between nations. This is the role of the Church in the face of conflicts over natural resources, to walk with people as a living witness of that perfect love which casts out fear and strengthens hearts to overcome evil with good, even at great cost. Let me repeat, a living witness of that perfect love which casts out fear and strengthens hearts to overcome evil with good, even at great cost. So, we must resist the temptation to turn problems like conflict over natural resources into abstractions at the so-called global level. Although the Church recognizes that systemic issues exist and their solution requires the collaboration of all, it also appreciates that each problem is embedded in a unique, particular context, and the universal church is expressed in the local church. This means that the concrete lives of parishes and parishioners are the front line of the Church's role in pacifying conflicts for natural resources. The local diocese's role as institutional interlocutor, the bishop's ministry as shepherd of his people, the function of national and regional conferences to coordinate initiatives, as well as to shape a moral discourse that can challenge political narratives, and finally also the role of our Dicastery to facilitate the exchange of expertise, best practices, and pastoral resources. Dear friends, these are not theoretical recommendations, but present how the Church is already concretely involved in the resolution of conflicts over natural resources around the world. In Peru, Catholic leaders have defended the rights of indigenous communities displaced by illegal gold mining, offering them both pastoral and legal support. In the Democratic Republic of the Congo, Cardinal Ambongo denounced the exploitation of rare earth minerals that fuels ecological devastation and armed conflict. In Burkina Faso, where terrorist groups weaponize control of water resources, the local church has responded with both advocacy and direct aid. In Guatemala and the Philippines, bishops give sanctuary to environmental defenders, thereby joining their voices to those of civil society. In the words of Pope Francis, these could be directed to you also. In the words of Pope Francis, you have to be there to remind politicians whom they are serving. You must stand there like the widow in the gospel, insisting, causing them to lose patience so that they will do justice. This is a tactic which Jesus taught us. Surely you will find other tactics, but always within nonviolence. Please always work for peace. War is a crime. These examples and this teaching are signs of hope. They demonstrate that the Church can and must be a visible force for justice, the care of creation, the defense of human dignity, and the construction of peace. The work is difficult. It requires courage, persistence, and faith, to the point of giving one's life. The path is clear: to walk with the poor, to listen to the earth, and to act in love out of the recognition of our common humanity and our universal desire for peace. In conclusion, at the Mass celebrating the beginning of the new pontificate, Pope Leo XIV said, "In this our time, we still see too much discord, too many wounds caused by hatred, violence, prejudice, the fear of difference, and an economic paradigm that exploits the earth's resources and marginalizes the poorest." And then he pledged the Church's pastoral accompaniment. For our part, we want to be a small leaven of unity, communion, and fraternity within the world. I hope that in this way, people's desire for a just peace in conflicts over natural resources will be fulfilled. And in the process, everyone involved will testify the Church is with us. Thank you so much for your kind attention.
So thank you very much for this enlightening presentation. And now we have time for a few questions and answers.
A few questions, but even fewer answers.
Okay. Thank you, Your Eminence, for your great presentation. You mentioned the Pope Leo the 14th reflections on today's conflicts and environmental challenges. Well, my question is, what do you see any differences between Pope Francis and Pope Leo XIV in their approach to peace and their foreign policy, especially in a region, like the Western Balkans, or where the conflicts over natural resources, yes, remain serious concern.
Yeah.
Thank
you. I'm sure you realize that it's too early to answer your question. Pope Leo has been Pope for just more than a month, and I could also say it's also his character, his style, to listen greatly before speaking or acting. So I think you have to be patient to begin to see the concrete differences, if there are, between them two. So I will respond more in terms of my conviction, because I don't think there's enough evidence. We haven't had enough time to be able to start to compare. But my conviction is that Pope Leo XIV will basically and thoroughly continue both the magisterium and the leadership of Pope Francis. but he will do it with a different style or a different emphasis. You could say that there are different vocations even within leadership. One great and important vocation or dimension is to launch processes. And Pope Francis, one of his most important teachings, something that is really worth meditating on over and over again, especially people like ourselves who have institutional connections or responsibilities. It is more important to launch processes than to occupy spaces. It is more important to launch processes than to occupy spaces. And if you think of some example for yourself, you will say, this is so very true. So very true. So very true. Because to protect spaces is in fact to defend them. And to defend spaces is in fact to reject the novelty, the challenge. Say this is us, this is how we are, and this is it. So this is very, very basic. However, you can't just keep launching processes. You also have to occupy spaces. In other words, processes need to be institutionalized. And that's not a bad word. Yes, it's not a pejorative word. It's an important part of human reality. Without institutions, we would not be here today. So, the processes need to be institutionalized or realized or implemented or even if you want, incarnated in reality. And I'm convinced that just as it was Pope Francis's great gift to launch processes, that it will prove to be a great gift of Pope Leo to implement them. And so if we had this meeting a year from now and you asked a question, a similar question, I would probably answer that the priorities are the same. The priorities are the same. And the moment, the phase, the style is the following one, the next one. And for that, we should be very grateful because I think as soon as you meditate on this, you see this is necessary. Synodality is a great process which has been launched, but now it has to take root. Or to speak more personally, the reform of the Curia, of the Roman Curia, is a great idea, and it's a great process, but it has to be implemented.
Your Eminence, your speech, you're calling us to, reminds us that we are all called to martyrdom in the end. And, well, this touches upon an open question on what to do, how to improve, how to not be spineless, as my wife would say, in the face of suffering and injustice or ethical wrongdoing. And of course, the call to the Christian call to give our lives for others is always looming there. And it's something easy to take when you are single and without children. I would say easier, perhaps. But when you address the injustice that is the fruit of corruption and organized crime, as we were discussing before this, briefly, it seems sometimes that when you call for, when you go to service in places like the ones you mentioned in your examples in South America, in Colombia, in Mexico, in Ecuador, the moment you accept a case as a lawyer, a position as a politician, and you want to do justice, you're just committing suicide, de facto. And no one would no Christian loves death, and we want to live, and we want to live for our children. So I just struggle very much with, because what you just said, it's, well, everything resonates as the long-standing teaching of the church. It's beautiful to see it manifest and concrete for today. And also your call for, the gospel is not a call for structural change, but personal change, martyrdom. And the call for that you just made for not for launching processes, but launching processes require individual sacrifices. So there's no way around it. I just want to hear your voice in this culture of love of life, how we can throw ourselves into the encounter of death as our martyr here teaches us. Thank you.
Thank you for the beautiful question. I don't think it's playing with words to say that no one chooses martyrdom. You don't choose martyrdom. You choose to witness, which is the same, it's the meaning, the same Greek meaning. And the Greek meaning of martyr, or the Greek word martyrio, is witness. So the point is the witnessing, it's not the giving up of your life. So that's already very important. Otherwise, if you interpret the story of Juan Antonio as that he opted for martyrdom, or the terrible word you use, suicide, that just is completely untrue, and it's not correct, the correct way. But rather, as Jesus himself, to opt for the will of God, the greater good, the good of all, and to pay the price. So these are two different things. Although I'm not married and have never been married and don't have children, I would say that you could solve your problem by asking what your children would want of you. What would your children want of you? And I think you know the answer. So it's not a choice between your children or martyrdom. It's a choice for life, life to the full, and that comes sometimes at very high cost. But I think it would be a very unhappy misinterpretation to say that Juan Antonio or Oscar Romero or the Jesuits in Central America or Jesus himself, that they chose it because that's what they wanted. It was not that. They paid the price for what was right, what was good. And maybe I could elaborate beyond your question. This is, I think, an important second paragraph, which we reflected on during the Synod. And that is, what does true authority consist in? How do you recognize true authority? It's one of the very interesting lines in the Gospel, where it says that the people recognize that Jesus spoke with authority, unlike the scribes and Pharisees. What does that mean? And the answer that we shared and I think agreed on in the Synod discussions was that true authority, we recognize true authority, not power, but true authority, when we perceive a commitment to the common good. When we perceive that person is acting in the common good and is not acting in terms of personal interests or other narrower interests, but is really working for the common good. And you can use that then to reread the life of Jesus and his, as the priest said in the video, his pre-announced death. In other words, his foreseeable death for his commitment to the common good and not to particular goods. And so I think this runs through everything that I said and much of what we discuss in terms of social ethics and political theology or social teaching of the church. How, now in concrete terms, do we exercise a real and effective commitment to the common good, even at the cost of our life? Even at the cost. But we do not choose martyrdom. I don't, people, yes, we have pious sayings that the person embraced the cross or embraced death, but that's not, at least that's not philosophically correct. The answer should be short.
Thank you. Your Excellency, the 21st century high-tech life offers many new perspectives. How realistic is it to speak about the so-called bloodless war in the future? Thank you.
I really don't know. I really don't know. But I think that I think that the entire talk I gave was an attempt to say that we should not think like that. We should not think like that. Let us not use concepts that sanitize or anesthetize or render abstract what the real issues and the real struggles are. And this is one of the great opportunities for the church, because the church is in reality totally rooted in local realities, and therefore I can't imagine that a church person involved with his or her people would speak of a bloodless war. It's just inconceivable when in fact you live with, you share, you weep over the bleeding of your people, and this is true everywhere. This is not just in the war spots or the poor spots. I mean, it goes on everywhere. It's going on in Budapest. It goes on in Rome. It goes on everywhere, and we pray for. And this is what Pope Francis stood for so much. We pray for a church that is walking with people and therefore speaking from their experience. So I'm afraid maybe I don't understand, but I would say no, there's no bloodless war.